She was called the most beautiful woman in the world, yet her life became a gilded prison. Princess Fawzia of Egypt traded one royal palace for another, only to find loneliness, control, and heartbreak behind closed doors. A political marriage stripped her of freedom, safety, and ultimately her place in history. This is the tragic story of Egypt's last princess, whose beauty could not save her from a royal fate she never chose. We all know that Princess Fawzia Fuad was the eldest daughter of King Fuad I of Egypt and Queen Nazli Sabri, arriving into a court that blended Ottoman legacy, European refinement, and the rising currents of modern Egyptian nationalism. From the moment of her birth, Fawzia occupied a symbolic position within the dynasty, not only as a royal child, but as a figure whose presence embodied elegance, continuity, and prestige at a time when monarchy still carried immense cultural power in Egypt. Raised within the rarefied world of royal palaces, Fawzia's early life unfolded amid formal protocol, multilingual education, and carefully curated public appearances. The Egyptian court of the 1920s and 1930s placed enormous emphasis on presentation, and from childhood she was trained in etiquette, poise, and the refined manners expected of a princess destined for international visibility. Her upbringing reflected a cosmopolitan sensibility. European fashions, languages, and cultural influences blended seamlessly with Egyptian royal tradition, shaping her into a figure both modern and unmistakably regal. It was, however, her extraordinary beauty that quickly set her apart, even within a family accustomed to admiration. By her teenage years, Fawzia was already being spoken of in reverent tones by diplomats, foreign visitors, and members of elite society. She possessed striking blue eyes, delicate yet commanding facial features, and a serene composure that gave her an almost ethereal presence. Observers often remarked that her beauty was not merely physical, but enhanced by a natural grace and quiet dignity that seemed effortless. By the late 1930s, Princess Fawzia had become an international sensation. Newspapers and magazines across Europe and the Middle East described her as one of the most beautiful women in the world, elevating her from royal figure to near mythic status. This reputation reached its peak during the early 1940s, when British photographer Cecil Beaton photographed her for Life magazine in 1942. Beaton famously portrayed her as an Asian Venus, capturing an image that blended classical idealism with modern glamour. The photographs circulated globally, cementing her image as a symbol of refined beauty and exotic elegance at a time when royal mystique still captivated the public imagination. At just 17 years old, Princess Fawzia Fuad found her life dramatically reshaped when her beauty, lineage, and international reputation became central to a major geopolitical alliance. In March 1939, she married Crown Prince Mohammad Reza Pahlavi of Iran in a lavish ceremony held at Abdeen Palace in Cairo, one of Egypt's most important royal residences. The marriage was far more than a romantic union. It was a carefully negotiated diplomatic arrangement designed to strengthen ties between two of the Middle East's most powerful monarchies, Egypt and Iran, at a time of growing global instability on the eve of World War II. The wedding was staged with extraordinary splendor, reflecting both dynasties' desire to project strength, legitimacy, and modernity. Royal guests, diplomats, and foreign dignitaries attended, while the international press closely followed every detail. Princess Fawzia, already famed as one of the most beautiful women in the world, appeared radiant in couture gowns and priceless jewels, instantly capturing global attention. For Egypt, the marriage elevated its royal family's international standing. For Iran, it symbolized a strategic alignment with a prestigious and well-established monarchy. Following the Cairo ceremony, Fawzia traveled to Iran, where a second wedding celebration was held in Tehran to formally introduce her to the Iranian court and public. The transition marked a profound shift in her life. Raised in a cosmopolitan Egyptian palace with strong European influences, She now entered a court shaped by Persian tradition, political reform, and rigid expectations. Though she was warmly welcomed as Iran's new crown princess, the cultural differences and formality of court life soon became apparent. In September 1941, everything changed once again when Reza Shah Pahlavi abdicated, forcing his son to ascend the throne amid Allied pressure during World War II. With Mohammad Reza's accession, Princess Fawzia officially became Queen Consort of Iran, one of the youngest queens in the world. Her coronation elevated her status, but also intensified the scrutiny surrounding her role. She was expected to embody royal dignity, produce an heir, and serve as a visible symbol of unity between Egypt and Iran. Despite her iconic public image, Fawzia's position was complex and often isolating. Her elegance and beauty continued to enchant observers, yet behind palace walls she struggled with distance from her homeland and the realities of a marriage shaped by duty rather than personal choice. Behind the dazzling image of a fairy tale royal marriage, Princess Fawzia Fuad soon found herself living a far more painful reality. Almost immediately after settling in Tehran, the immense cultural gap between her upbringing and her new surroundings became impossible to ignore. Raised in the cosmopolitan Egyptian court, where European manners, languages, and social freedoms blended naturally with royal tradition, Fawzia struggled to adapt to an Iranian palace that felt more conservative, rigid, and inward-looking by comparison. What had been presented as a glamorous international union quickly turned into a life of isolation. The Iranian court operated under strict hierarchies and expectations that left little room for the elegance and independence Fawzia had known. Social life was tightly controlled, etiquette formal, and the atmosphere often heavy with political tension. As a young foreign bride, she found herself watched closely and judged constantly, expected to conform to customs that felt unfamiliar and emotionally confining. The language barrier further deepened her sense of alienation, limiting her ability to form genuine connections beyond formal interactions. Relations within the royal household added to her distress. Fawzia's relationship with her mother-in-law was strained, marked by suspicion and emotional distance. Her sisters-in-law reportedly viewed her with a mixture of jealousy and mistrust, resenting the attention her beauty and international fame attracted. Instead of finding warmth or companionship within the family, Fawzia often felt like an outsider in a palace that never truly became her home. Her marriage to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi also deteriorated rapidly. Though outwardly courteous in public, the relationship lacked emotional closeness, and her husband was frequently unfaithful, a reality that deeply wounded her. The young queen, who had entered the marriage with little choice and even less preparation, found herself trapped in a union that offered neither affection nor understanding. These betrayals compounded her loneliness and eroded any remaining sense of security she might have hoped to find as queen. Amid these struggles, Fawzia's longing for Egypt grew more intense with each passing year. She missed her family, her language, the warmth of Alexandria, and the familiarity of Egyptian court life. Letters, memories, and occasional visits could not ease the ache of separation. Egypt represented not only her homeland, but a lost sense of self, one tied to freedom, beauty, and emotional safety. By 1944, the cumulative weight of Princess Fawzia Fuad's unhappy marriage, cultural isolation, and prolonged separation from her homeland had taken a serious psychological toll. What had begun as quiet sadness and loneliness deepened into clinical depression, marking one of the most painful chapters of her life. Still publicly admired as a symbol of grace and royal beauty, Fawzia was privately unraveling under the strain of a role that demanded silence, endurance, and emotional restraint. Her days at the Iranian court became increasingly withdrawn. Once celebrated for her elegance at official events, she began to retreat from public life, avoiding ceremonies and limiting appearances. Palace observers noted her persistent fatigue, emotional fragility, and a visible loss of vitality. The expectations placed upon her to be a flawless queen, a political symbol, and a devoted wife offered no space for personal vulnerability. Isolated and unheard, she found herself trapped between royal duty and profound inner despair. Recognizing the seriousness of her condition, arrangements were made for Fawzia to seek professional help. She began seeing an American psychiatrist, a rare and telling decision at a time when mental health treatment was still stigmatized, especially within royal circles. The diagnosis of depression reflected not weakness, but the immense psychological pressure borne by a young woman thrust into a life she neither chose nor could escape. Her treatment underscored the severity of her emotional suffering and the recognition that her distress had become medically and psychologically dangerous. The effects of her depression soon manifested physically. Fawzia's health visibly deteriorated, alarming those closest to her. She experienced exhaustion, weight loss, and recurring illness, symptoms that mirrored her internal collapse. Reports sent by Egyptian courtiers and family envoys painted a troubling picture of a queen whose condition was described as precarious, prompting growing concern in Cairo. Her family feared that remaining in Tehran under such circumstances could have irreversible consequences. These reports triggered urgent diplomatic and familial intervention. Egyptian officials pressed for her return, emphasizing the seriousness of her health and the need for proper care in familiar surroundings. Behind closed doors, discussions intensified over whether her continued presence in Iran was sustainable or humane. What had once been hailed as a triumphant royal alliance was now widely understood to be emotionally destructive. In May 1945, Princess Fawzia Fuad finally left Tehran, marking a decisive turning point in her life. Physically weakened and emotionally exhausted, she returned to Cairo with a clear and unwavering resolve. She would never return to Iran. What had once been presented as a prestigious royal destiny had instead become a source of profound suffering, and Fawzia no longer wished to endure a life defined by isolation, unhappiness, and cultural displacement. Her return was not merely a change of location, it was an act of personal survival. Back in Egypt, surrounded by family and familiar customs, Fawzia's recovery began almost immediately. The warmth of her homeland, the presence of her relatives, and the freedom from relentless court scrutiny offered a stark contrast to her years in Tehran. For the first time in years, she was no longer expected to perform the role of queen for political symbolism alone. Egypt represented safety, identity, and emotional refuge, everything she had lost during her marriage. Shortly after her return, Fawzia filed for divorce in Egypt, formally citing the complete breakdown of her marriage to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The decision was bold and unprecedented for a woman of her status, especially one who had been a reigning queen. The divorce proceedings were conducted under Egyptian jurisdiction, and the marriage was dissolved according to Egyptian law soon after her departure from Iran. In Cairo, her decision was largely viewed with sympathy, shaped by widespread awareness of her fragile health and deep unhappiness. However, the end of the marriage was not immediately acknowledged by Iran. The Iranian court, concerned with prestige, political optics, and royal continuity, refused to recognize the divorce for several years. This legal and diplomatic limbo placed Fawzia in a unique and uncomfortable position, divorced in Egypt, yet still technically married under Iranian law. During this period, she lived quietly in Cairo, avoiding public controversy and allowing time and distance to finalize what had become inevitable. On November 17, 1948, Iran formally recognized the divorce, bringing the prolonged separation to a definitive close. With this recognition, Fawzia officially relinquished her title as Queen Consort of Iran, ending one of the most tragic royal unions of the 20th century. She resumed her former identity as a princess of Egypt, reclaiming both her personal autonomy and her national belonging. After years marked by political obligation, emotional isolation, and public scrutiny, Princess Fawzia Fuad entered a profoundly different chapter of her life in March 1949 when she married Colonel Ismail Chirine, Unlike her first marriage, which had been arranged to serve dynastic and diplomatic interests, this union was widely regarded as a personal choice, shaped by mutual respect and emotional compatibility rather than royal strategy. For Fawzia, it represented not only a new beginning, but a conscious step toward reclaiming happiness on her own terms. Ismail Chirine was an Egyptian diplomat and military officer, known for his refined manners, intelligence, and discretion. Though well connected within Egypt's elite circles, he was not a reigning monarch, and this distinction mattered greatly to Fawzia. Their marriage freed her from the rigid ceremonial demands that had once defined her life as Queen of Iran. The wedding itself was conducted with dignity, but without the overwhelming spectacle that had accompanied her first marriage, signaling her desire for privacy and emotional stability rather than global attention. In this quieter domestic setting, Fawzia flourished. She settled into a more private family life, largely removed from the political theater of royal courts. Friends and relatives observed a visible change in her demeanor. She appeared calmer, more relaxed, and emotionally restored. The constant pressures that had once exacerbated her depression were replaced by routine, affection, and a sense of belonging she had long been denied. The marriage produced 2 children, who became the center of Fawzia's world. Her daughter Nadia and son Hussein Chirine offered her a deeply fulfilling maternal role that contrasted sharply with her childless years in Iran. Motherhood allowed Fawzia to experience a form of love unburdened by politics or expectation, grounding her in everyday joys and responsibilities. She devoted herself to raising her children, carefully shielding them from excessive public exposure and the royal limelight she herself had once endured. The Egyptian Revolution of 1952 marked another dramatic rupture in the life of Princess Fawzia Fuad, ending not only a political era, but also the world into which she had been born. The overthrow of the monarchy forced her brother, King Farouk, to abdicate and leave Egypt for exile, bringing the centuries-old rule of the Muhammad Ali dynasty to an abrupt close. For Fawzia, the revolution did not involve physical exile, but it carried profound personal consequences that reshaped her identity, security, and place in society. Unlike many members of the former royal family, Fawzia remained in Egypt, largely because of her marriage to Ismail Chirine, whose position as an Egyptian diplomat and military officer allowed the couple to navigate the transition with caution and discretion. Still, the abolition of the monarchy stripped her of all official royal titles, ceremonial roles, and privileges. Once celebrated internationally as a queen and princess, she was now legally a private citizen in a republic determined to erase symbols of royal excess. This transformation fundamentally altered Fawzia's daily life. The palaces, public appearances, and formal obligations that had once defined her existence disappeared almost overnight. Properties were seized, royal circles dissolved, and many former courtiers scattered or silenced. While the revolution spared her from imprisonment or forced exile, it ushered in an era of quiet withdrawal. Conscious of the political climate and the risks of visibility, Fawzia chose discretion over defiance. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, she gradually retreated from public life, limiting her social interactions and avoiding political engagement. Her legendary beauty and former status still attracted attention, but she resisted public nostalgia for the monarchy. Instead, she focused on her family, raising her children and maintaining a carefully controlled private existence. The trauma of her earlier years as Queen of Iran had already taught her the cost of public exposure. The revolution reinforced her desire for anonymity. The fall of the monarchy also carried emotional weight. The exile of her brother and the dismantling of her family's legacy represented a deep personal loss. The identity she had carried since birth, rooted in dynastic continuity and national symbolism, was gone. Yet rather than cling to the past, Fawzia adapted with quiet resilience. She neither publicly challenged the new regime nor sought to reclaim influence, choosing survival and stability over confrontation. By the 1970s, Princess Fawzia Fuad had fully embraced a life of deliberate quiet, far removed from the courts, crowns, and international fascination that once defined her existence. She divided her time primarily between Alexandria and Cairo, living in comfortable but unassuming residences that reflected her desire for privacy rather than display. The political turbulence of the Middle East, the fall of monarchies, and the shifting cultural landscape only reinforced her determination to remain distant from public life and controversy. Gone were the elaborate ceremonies, official engagements, and relentless press coverage of her youth. Fawzia chose a routine shaped by seclusion and discretion, carefully limiting her public appearances and avoiding interviews altogether. To many Egyptians of a younger generation, she became a near-legendary figure, remembered faintly as a former queen of Iran or a princess of a vanished monarchy, but rarely seen or heard from. This fading visibility was not accidental. It was the result of conscious withdrawal, shaped by painful experience and a lifelong preference for dignity over attention. Despite her seclusion, Fawzia did not sever her connection to society entirely. In private, she remained involved in modest charitable activities, particularly those related to social welfare and community support. And, unlike the grand philanthropic roles expected of royal women in earlier decades, her charitable work was understated and personal. She preferred quiet donations and behind-the-scenes involvement, avoiding public acknowledgement or ceremonial patronage. This approach reflected both the political realities of post-monarchical Egypt and her own wish to serve without spectacle. Within intimate social circles, Fawzia was remembered as gracious, reserved, and deeply private. Friends noted that she retained her elegance and poise well into old age, though softened by introspection and lived experience. Her legendary beauty, once a global obsession, gave way to a more subdued presence, one marked by composure rather than glamour. She rarely spoke of her past as Queen of Iran, and even less of the personal suffering that had accompanied that chapter of her life. By the late 20th century, media attention surrounding Princess Fawzia had largely faded. New political figures, cultural icons, and global celebrities dominated headlines, leaving little room for a former royal who had chosen silence. When she did appear in occasional retrospectives or historical discussions, it was often with a tone of nostalgia, emphasizing her beauty and tragic royal story rather than her long years of quiet endurance. Princess Fawzia Fuad died on July 2, 2013 in Alexandria, Egypt, at the age of 91, bringing to a close one of the most quietly poignant lives in modern royal history. Her passing occurred far from the palaces and international attention that had once defined her youth. In her final years, she lived much as she had chosen to for decades, away from public spectacle, surrounded by familiarity rather than ceremony, and removed from the world stage that had once elevated and constrained her in equal measure. Fawzia's death marked the end of a life shaped by extraordinary contrasts. She had risen to global fame at an early age, celebrated internationally for her legendary beauty, and crowned Queen of Iran before she was 20. Yet behind the glamour lay profound personal suffering, a politically arranged marriage that brought cultural dislocation, emotional isolation, and deep psychological pain. Few royal figures so fully embodied the tension between public myth and private reality. What the world admired in photographs and headlines often masked years of loneliness and quiet endurance. Her funeral was held on the 3rd of July 2013, following prayers at Sayyida Nafisa Mosque in Cairo, one of Egypt's most revered religious sites. The ceremony was dignified but restrained, reflecting the life she had lived in her later decades. Family members, close friends, and a limited number of mourners gathered to pay their respects, absent the global media frenzy that had once followed her every move. She was laid to rest beside her second husband, Ismail Chirine, the man with whom she had found stability and emotional refuge after years of upheaval. The subdued nature of her passing stood in stark contrast to the dramatic arc of her early life. There were no grand state funerals, no sweeping public commemorations, and no political pageantry. Instead, her death unfolded quietly, mirroring the seclusion she had deliberately chosen after decades marked by loss and transformation. For many, this silence felt deeply symbolic, a final affirmation of her lifelong retreat from the expectations and burdens of royalty. Princess Fawzia's legacy endures not through power or political achievement, but through the deeply human story she left behind. She remains remembered as one of the most beautiful royal women of the 20th century, yet her true significance lies in her lived experience. A woman born into privilege who paid a heavy emotional price for dynastic ambition and who ultimately reclaimed her dignity through withdrawal, family, and restraint. What do you think about Princess Fawzia? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.